Let's talk about Apple Studio Display XDR, their new 27-inch 5K mini LED backlight with 120Hz refresh rate. And don't worry, there are many more specs that I'm going to share with you in this review, some that others don't even talk about. Now, when Apple initially announced this display, I was impressed with the specification. I made a video on that, wow, this display is really just amazing. When I've done the first initial unboxing on this display, there are a lot of things I'm finding out about it that is really unique to the Studio Display XDR. And now that I have a chance to test this out, give it a run through in a full color workflow, for example, in Lightroom Classic doing HDR preview and color testing and everything, being able to put this display into various preset mode, fine-tune calibration, and best of all, do a full calibration on it using this device with Apple Pro Display Calibrator that's built into macOS. I can tell you right now, this is a complete package that if you want the best 27-inch 5K display out there, this is pretty much it. There is nothing out there that comes even close to this display packaged together that's on the market at this point in time. And I think it will be hard pressed for any other display manufacturers to come up with something like this that can have the full integration Apple has. Now let's talk about this display. I'm ArtIsRight. So I'll be referring to my notes on the side here because there is so much information I do want to cover. But the first thing I want to say is that everything I'm doing on this channel is pretty much self-funded. These are not seeded from Apple by any means. I don't get products from them to do reviews. So everything, it's all, like I said, self-funded. If you find information that I'm sharing with you helpful, I'll leave a link to my tip jar in the description. YouTube Super Thanks works as well. And if the only thing that you can do is tapping on that like button and subscribing to the video or the channel, if you haven't already, I would appreciate that all the same. All right, now let's talk about this. So this Studio Display XDR is what Apple consider Pro displays. Some of the other displays in Apple Pro Display range would be the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, would be the Studio Display version 1 and 2, and the Pro Display XDR. That is the 32-inch 6K display. So all these are Pro displays that can do reference mode or preset mode. You can create custom presets, you can do fine-tune calibration, and now you can also do full calibration on it. So interestingly enough, in macOS 26 and also with the launch of this display and also the M5 laptop, well, Apple have done one thing, is they have added a device to a compatibility list for full calibration, and that is the Calibration Display Plus HL. Before then, we have devices from Photo Research, which I don't even know how much they cost, probably $10,000 plus. They are industrial device that requires very specific knowledge on how to use them and very specific skills, which I don't even have. There are devices from Color Research, and the cheapest device you can get, brand new, is around $6,000. And you still need a lot of knowledge to use that. There's a lot of asterisks that comes with it. But with this device being added into the list, this is a $339 device from Calibration, and now you can do a full calibration with this. This device is super easy to use, is very forgiving. You don't have to have a lot of knowledge and specific know-how. And in fact, I made a 3-part video talking about reference mode, fine-tune calibration, and also how to do a full calibration on your Apple Pro Display. So I'll leave links to those in the description. I highly recommend you check it out. But what Apple have done is not only enable this compatible device to just the new displays that are out in the market, every single Pro display that I've talked about, they have gone in and enabled the full calibration feature with this device from Calibration. Now that's really awesome. When we take a look at this as a whole, this is now becoming a really great deal because you're not just getting a display. You're not just getting an Apple display. You're not just getting something that integrates better with Apple's system. You're getting a system or display that is capable of doing hardware calibration with a different preset mode, different color mode on the display. And normally you have to pay a lot of money for a hardware calibrated display. And there are compromises along the way. Many companies will compromise certain aspect or another. I mean, this display definitely does have its own compromise too. We're going to talk about that. But overall, I mean, the value that you're getting out of this entire package is really just amazing. And like I said, the macOS integration feature is just absolutely astonishing. I would say that it's difficult for any other display manufacturers to compete because they do not have the vertical integration that Apple has. And this is one of those unique ones where I said in the beginning, this is a unicorn. It's still a unicorn, but it's not just a unicorn because it's unique. It's a unicorn because it's also really awesome at good color accuracy. So one of the things that I said in my note here was like, it's like comparing apple to oranges. That's kind of like a joke in a way, but it's also true. It's really true. And I wish that Apple would really talk more about the hardware calibration aspect of the display, which is something that they don't really go over that much. Now, there are reference papers and white papers and guide that they have made for this. I'll leave a link to them down in the description if you want to check that out. So Let's first start out with the specs because there are many that you already know and some that you don't. This is obviously, as I already told you, a 27-inch 5K display, 5120 by 2880. Most of the time when you plug into macOS, it's going to default at around a 2K equivalent resolution. This way you get the 4x pixels. Everything is easier to read on the screen. So even though you have a 5K display, you're not really ever running a true 5K in a Mac. You're always running at kind of the scaling resolution all the time for the text and everything to be easily legible. I mean, if you try to run this in native 5K, everything is going to be super tiny and really hard to see. Now, the pixels per inch of this display is 218, which qualifies at over 200, and this is now considered a Retina display from Apple. The aspect ratio, as you can see right now, is 16:9, and the base panel, what I have found out from my testing is that it is an 8-bit panel, but it's actually doing an 8-bit plus FRC to get you to that 10 bits. Now, as far as this specific FRC method they're using, where that is temporal dithering or pulse wave modulation, PWM, I'm not really sure what they're using, but I know it's for sure a 10-bit panel that is done by an 8-bit base panel plus FRC on this one. So this is the slight scale back from, for instance, the Pro Display XDR, where that panel was a true 10-bit panel. This one have gone over to an 8-bit panel plus FRC on that one. So this one has mini LED backlight, and there are 2,304 zones with a custom timing controller chip. Now, Apple timing controller chip has been really amazing since they have launched the Pro Display XDR already. In fact, that one is my daily driver, so I know. Compared to other mini LED displays out there, I can tell you right now that Apple, bar none, I don't see a lot of issues on the day-to-day use. For example, when I have a browser open or when I'm doing an interface in Lightroom, I don't see blooming or anything happen, where I see a lot more of those in other third-party displays. Apple have done an amazing job, and part of it too is because they're now controlling the entire vertical stack. They're doing the custom timing controller for that, whereas many other third-party manufacturers, what they would do is pick off-the-shelf part, combine those together with the scaler on the system, and try to integrate everything to work together using their own software solution, but it's not something that they have developed entirely for the entire stack in-house. Now, this is also using a new Apple calibration method from the factory, and that is the CMF 2026 calibration. Essentially, this is a brand new calibration method that no longer is relying on the CIE 1931 color method, because in that color reference mode, there are some limitations when it comes to modern display. The classic one would be if you have two displays with very similar specs, you're calibrating them in the exact same way, but they're using slightly different backlight technology. Most of the time, you'll see some of the variation between those displays, and that is called metamerism, and that tends to happen a lot. This new calibration method is really designed to really minimize that. Now, these are the calibration method that Apple have used on their more casual user mode. So this would be the Apple XDR display with P3 2000 nits, or the Apple XDR display P3 Adobe RGB 2000 nits. In all the other reference mode that comes standard, these are the modes that you would use for your own creative workflow. Well, they're still using the CIE 1931 because that is the standard, and it's really hard to break those standards that have been around before. And if they're really going and break those standards right away, I mean, certain workflow may not work properly with color anymore, so they have to preserve that for the time being. But I'm hoping that this is going to be the push forward that many other display manufacturers and Apple themselves too use this on all of their display going forward, because so far they're only using this new method on the Studio Display XDR. Interestingly enough, because of this mini LED backlight, this display can go up to 1000 nits in SDR, although in my testing, when I max out the brightness on the display in SDR, I'm only able to get to around like 600. To get to beyond 600 to that 1000 mark, you need to have a program that is capable of sending a signal to the timing controller on the display to enable kind of like somewhat pseudo HDR mode, or somewhat the higher luminance of the SDR mode on that one. So this is something I found out from there. And there's really no way to manually trigger that 2000 nits, because you're definitely going to burn the display out. To really do that, you need to use a capable program, for example, Lightroom Classic, or Camera Raw doing HDR preview. You can then push the timing controller, because it's going to send the signal into the system firmware, into the OS, and push the timing controller to make those pixels brighter in HDR. Or if you're using a video player back app, for example, Apple TV app, and if you're viewing any of their content in HDR, this would be a fantastic display for that. Now, the contrast ratio for this is 1,000,000 to 1, and the refresh rate is 120 Hz. We talk about that a little bit, because that is the main key selling point here with adaptive syncs. If you're running into problems, sometimes setting it to a fixed 120 tends to solve the problems on that one. Now, the color gamut coverage, which not a lot of people talk about this, based on my independent verification, I'm able to see that this display can produce between 97 and 98% P3 color gamut, and also 97 to 98% Adobe RGB. And this is the very first display in a very long time that Apple has released with Adobe RGB. In fact, this is the very first of the Pro display from Apple that they have put Adobe RGB in there as a standard. And you have to think about this. Apple is the company that came up with Display P3 as a standard because they make so many displays. Rather than using and conforming to a print standard of Adobe RGB, they come up with something that's really more display centric. So they've been doing that for a long time. For them to really bring Adobe RGB back again is them giving a nod to any pro workflow out there or any pro photographer like myself saying that, hey, you know, we understand you want Adobe RGB and we're going to give this to you. And now there is a panel that can do that. And I would say thank you for that. I mean, I really appreciate this because this is now a really awesome panel for photography. I mean, simply put, if you do any print, this is freaking awesome. All right. With that said, this has the option to do True Tone, although I generally recommend that you turn that off. It comes with standard glass with an anti-reflective coating or a nano texture option. This one has nano texture option. You can see right there. If I rotate this, it's just diffusing a light in the display. And this, you know, nano texture from Apple, I really like that. It's not kind of like fully matte like many other coatings from other manufacturers. In fact, if you want to find out more about the nano texture etching option, I made a video specifically talking about that. I'll leave a link to that in the description. Highly recommend that you check that out. Now, the one thing that I found out is that the nano texture coating on here, there is a slight different color tint coating on here, which is a little bit more green, whereas on the, for example, 16-inch MacBook Pro, this is the M5 Max one with the nano texture etching. The tint color tends to be a little bit more, I would say, towards like the blue purple on here, where this one's a little more green. Just some slightly different to note there. I don't think this is really like anything big as a deal at all, but there are some different coating and treatment that's being done on the glass. The Infinity Edge is on all four sides. I don't know if you really can call this Infinity Edge or not. There's a black edge on all four of them, but at least it doesn't really have a sheen like many other display manufacturers, which is a great thing. I really wish the borders around the display are smaller because that will make it even more sleeker. But the package that I have built in here, I mean, this, I just think is really cool because try to look at other display manufacturers out there. Finding something that is unique like this, that's slim like this with a stand that looks just really awesome. I mean, I've tested a lot of displays and a lot of times, you know, they're not like this. I mean, one hand, push up, down, like that on the tilt and height adjustable stand. You don't really get that. It's not that easy on the other ones. You have to put a lot of pressure on them because they're just simply using springs, and Apple designed their springs like really well. It sounds like I'm really praising Apple on this one, but I think they have done a really great job with this display, particularly all the color aspect of this particular display and the generation. Now, there are many other reviews out there that talks about the spec of the display, and many of them tend to talk about a mini computer running in here with its own operating system. For example, inside the Studio Display XDR, there is an A19 Pro with 128 gigabytes of storage. This storage is used for the operating system to run, don't know what the Apple even call it. Let's just call it Display OS, right? So there is an operating system that's running on here, and this storage chip also is responsible for all of the custom preset that you have created. So when you create a custom preset, it's stored on the display. When you do a full calibration, it's stored on the display. When you do a fine-tuned calibration on each of the preset mode, it's stored on the display. So even though if I've created those and I have this link in my laptop, I can simply disconnect this, plug it into another Mac, for example, a Mac Studio that doesn't even have a display, and I will have all of the preset mode, the custom one that I've made, including the fine-tuned calibration and the full calibration data on here. This is really awesome. They're making their product a standalone device, but it integrates very well with any macOS computer that's capable or compatible that you're plugging it in. Now, beyond the 128 gigabyte storage, there is a 12 gigabytes of RAM because it is a computer. On the XDR version, there's 8 gigabyte of it on the Studio Display too. I mean, not that really matters at all in terms of the way how we use this on a day-to-day basis, but I mean, this tends to be the spec that people covers. I mean, it's kind of like having a mini iPhone running on inside because of A19 Pro chip, right? Firmware update for this display is pretty much done via macOS or done via your iPad that you have plugged in. There's going to be an update that you have a download. It's the firmware, the new version of the display. You do that. It talks to the display. It goes through the update process. The display kind of goes blank and it shows like ... for firmware upgrade. And that's pretty much it, the way how you go through and update this. And Apple will continue to release firmware update over time. And now let's talk about the overall package, ergonomics, and industrial design. I've talked about some of this already, but you can see that this is a really neat slim display. This is the profile on the back. That's pretty much it. It's super simple. is really nice, it's really clean, and there are very few other display manufacturers out there that has this kind of overall package. I mean, this, like I said, is really awesome. So now the option that I have, this is the tilt and height adjustable stand, which is one of the options that is included on this one in the Studio Display XDR. The other option would be to get the vase mount option. Now you have to really choose carefully because there is no way to detach this on your own. You have to pretty much take this in to either an Apple store or service center or something, and you have to buy that vase mount or the other stand that you want, or if you want to change out to another stand, you have to buy that separately, and they have to take the display apart in order for you to access that. I would say that accessibility for the stand and the ability to change that is one of the big downsides here. The other downside to this particular one compared to the Pro Display XDR, that is the 32-inch 6K one, is that on the Pro Display XDR, it has a similar mechanism, but what I can do is just literally unlock a latch there and rotate the display vertical. I can't do this on the tilt and height adjustable stand. So if you want to do that, you have to get the one with the vase mount and then use your own mounting option. Interestingly enough though, on this display, there is a sensor in the display that will rotate it vertically when you rotate the display. I know, a very interesting way to demonstrate this, just because, I mean, simply enough, the stand doesn't rotate the display for it. So like I said, one big downside there. The positive side about this whole thing is that the stand for this, it's not $1,000 like the Pro Display XDR. So something interesting to note there. And yeah, if you choose the vase mount option, is BYOM, bring your own mount. All right, like I said, the profile is very slim. In the package itself, what you have are 6 speakers that can do spatial audio with 30% more bass and also Dolby Atmos support. So if you're watching, for example, Apple TVs, like the shows they're making, this sounds absolutely incredible. I'm not going to do a demo for the sound or anything like that. It doesn't record really well anyway. There's other channels that do that. And if you really want to get a sound demo for this, I recommend going to an Apple store or a store near you that have the display that you can really test that out. That would be the best way to really sample that. In the center, there's also a center stage camera with depth view that is a 12 megapixel camera. And I don't use cameras that much in my workflow, but nonetheless it is 12 megapixel, and it does have sensor stage. That's pretty much the one that follows you around. So Apple have done a lot of great things here. In addition to this, there's also 3 mic array. That's what they consider their studio quality mic, and they have done a really great job with sound and audio, and also with support for Hey feature. I'm not going to say it. Oh, see, it activated already. So I'm not going to try to activate. Hopefully I didn't activate in your home. But anyway, yeah, so it has support for all those. This is one of those things, like I said, the overall package is just absolutely amazing. You get amazing sound. There are other display manufacturers out there to try to integrate speaker, but I mean, I'm sorry, they are a joke. They have like 2 speakers with like 1 slight subwoofer that are 3 watts. I mean, they're selling it on a different matrix here. I mean, Apple is just doing such an amazing job with their sound quality on these displays that it's hard for the other display manufacturers to compete. The microphone on here is great. The camera on here, it's like decent to great. I mean, plus the panel is really great for color accuracy. I mean, come up with something that really beats this. All right, now let's talk about connectivity. So one of the things about the connectivity of this display is that the power cord is pretty much built in onto the back of here. You can't really disconnect this. I mean, like, you can probably try to force it out if you really want to, but I don't really recommend that. It is a braided cord. It is a pretty good distance, and it's 3-prong on the other end so that you can plug it into the wall. So that's just one thing about it. The Thunderbolt 5 cable is included, and there are 4 ports on the back. One of them is the Thunderbolt upstream. This is pretty much the one linking up to your laptop, and it can provide 140 watts of power and also full 120 gigabits per second transfer speed based on the Thunderbolt 5 standard. There's also a secondary Thunderbolt 5. This is a downstream port, so you can actually link it to other device dock. For example, if you want to connect another display to this, you can. And there's also 2 USB Type-C that are 3.0 that can do 10 gigabits per second one on the back, and you can use those for charging. And in these ports, by the way, you can use it to charge or power up other device. So it's very simple here, but otherwise this is the back of the display. I mean, that's pretty much it. Tilt height adjustable stand and just a simple flat back with 2 cables going into it. Super simple, super nice, super easy, right? So this is pretty much just this connectivity of it. And some people have asked about, like, what happens if you have multiple computers? Well, simply enough, what you would do is just literally yank this Thunderbolt 5 cord out of the computer you're using and plug into the other one. That's pretty much the way how you would do that. Now, whether this is compatible with a dock that supports KVM or not, for example, a Thunderbolt 5 dock, I haven't really tried it out, so I can't really tell whether that's going to work. I mean, I'm sure there are other channels that may have tested out. I don't have any Thunderbolt 5 docks that have KVM capability for me to show you that. Now, the other thing that's really golden and unique about this display are the reference mode. And let me just kind of give you a quick show of that. So if you go into System Settings and Display, you will see in the Studio Display XDR, there are all these presets. And right now, I have it in Apple XDR Display P3 plus Adobe RGB 2000. But there are different modes that Apple have added into there. For example, medical imaging, DICOM 350, DICOM 600. There's photography, Adobe RGB, HDR photography, design and print, Adobe RGB. So they have integrated all these color modes in, additional ones that are based on the color gamut increase that you do get on this display. Now, the one nice thing that I will say about this though is that with all these reference mode, Apple is really trying to push their display more for like the pro market, more for like the pro creative market, and also the serious market out there, for example, like medical imaging. And they're really doing a really great job with this, I would say, overall. So what I found out about these reference modes is that they're definitely a great starting point. I highly recommend creating custom reference mode like I do here. And if you want to see and learn how to do that, guides are going to be below in the description. So there's that. And you can also do, for instance, a calibrate display. And in general, I would highly recommend doing a fine-tune calibration if you can, if you want to get the best color possible, because in my testing, I found that without fine-tune calibration, with just setting the display into a custom mode, I mean, in that one, you're going to get a pretty good color gamut conformity, but it's not going to be necessarily the most color accurate, meaning that you're going to get a delta E between 2 and 4. The moment you do a fine-tune calibration, that delta E starts to drop below 2. And if you're wondering about the delta E value, that is describing how much. It's a number to describe how much your display is off or on reference, meaning that the lower the number is, the more color accurate your display is. And anything below 2 is really considered great for a pro creative workflow display. And then when you do just the fine-tune calibration, not even the full calibration, it has done a really amazing job in that regard. Now, the nice thing about doing a fine-tune calibration as well, and this entire whole new process from Apple to streamline color workflow, you're also not relying on an ICC profile. You're using the generic ICC profile that comes with the system, and the color conversion just works automatically on the back end in macOS. And it has done a really great job doing all those color conversions for us. So those are things to think about. And particularly on the Studio Display XDR and on the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, when you do the fine-tune calibration, it's not just display-wide or system-wide. You can do a fine-tune calibration for each individual preset mode that you have created, including the custom ones. So each of those preset mode will have its own fine-tune calibration for even greater color accuracy. And on the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro, this goes all the way to the M1 Pro and M1 Max. Now, the next thing that we need to talk about is the new color gamut that Apple has introduced into this one, because this panel can show a high coverage of P3 and also a high coverage of Adobe RGB. So what Apple have done here is combine those two together to create a P3 plus Adobe RGB. And essentially what they're really doing here is running the panel like a panel native, meaning that running at the native color gamut, showing you the most color gamut possible. Now, interestingly enough, because we're not really doing a display calibration in the traditional method using a program to generate a software calibration profile, we don't really have to worry about gamut conformity as much, because if the colors can be mapped in that gamut color space, it's just going to be mapped there. Now, what I have done is pull in a really large paper and print profile from Canon and Epson printer. And essentially there are certain areas, for example, that Adobe RGB can't show, but when we extend the gamut into P3, it can cover a little bit more of those areas. And the same thing on P3 side as well, meaning that there are certain colors that P3 can't show, but Adobe RGB tends to cover it. And I would say that this is a mode that if you're doing printing, I would definitely give this a try and see how it works for you. I haven't done extensive testing on that, so I'll be doing more testing on that later on. It is a kind of like a new color gamut. It doesn't conform to any type of standards per se. It's a combination of the two, but nonetheless, it's like panel native, and I thought that was really neat because other display manufacturers have this capability, but nobody actually decided to do this or break the mold in that regard. So let's talk about compatibility quickly here, because I know many of you are going to have a question about this. So interestingly enough, none of the M1 generation, the vanilla one, the Pro, Max, or Ultra Silicon, can run 5K at 120. It can only run 5K at 60 Hertz. On the older Intel Mac, amazingly enough, I have a 2018 15-inch MacBook Pro, and what I'm going to simply do right now is I'll disconnect this display and I'll link it, right, KVM switch. I'm the manual KVM switch. So I'm going to plug this into my 15-inch MacBook Pro. I mean, it's working right now. Let me launch Safari. Yes, it is a little bit slower, but this is Safari running on the display. In fact, what I can do is this. Let's go into System Settings, drag this over. We'll go into Display. And with Studio XDR, it doesn't see the Studio Display XDR. It just simply says Studio XDR. This is also running, I believe, let's see here. This is running Sequoia 15.7.5, so not that old of an operating system. And what I can do is certainly access my custom creative preset mode. In fact, if I go into Calibrate Display, let's go and take a look at that. Interestingly enough, the Apple Pro Display Calibrator is not compatible, but this one is not going to show that I have already calibrated the display because it's on an Intel machine, but nonetheless, the settings that I have saved, and when I've done the calibration on my 60-inch MacBook Pro with the M5 silicon in there, it's pretty much already on the display. It's just certain capabilities won't be fully there for an Intel machine. I think this is what they were saying, compatibility, and I think what they're really referring to is the full compatibility, but nonetheless, this does work. Now, interestingly enough, because this is an Intel machine, I have also done a boot camp installation on here and installed Windows 11. Interestingly enough, Windows 11 does not even see this external display whatsoever, but, interestingly enough, I have the ROG Z13, and with this computer, this can run this 27-inch 5K at full 5K 120 Hertz. So this one is using an AMD Ryzen Max Plus on the inside and also an AMD Radeon graphic card. I don't know it's a specific one, but I'm not going to look that up right now. But simply, I'll show you that this can pretty much power this display. So when it comes to an Intel Mac, I would say you have partial compatibility mode there, probably depending on the machine that you have. I wouldn't necessarily bet on this working all the time, and it's one of those your mileage may vary because Apple say it is really not supported. Now let's talk about the other Macs here. For example, if newer PC that I'm about to show you will work, any of the following Mac will work for 5K 120, and that would be the M2 and M3 generation, the Pro, the Max, and the Ultra Silicon. Now, the vanilla M2, M3, and M4 will not work with 5K 120. The M4 generation, the Pro, and the Max Silicon will work 5K 120 on here, and all the M5 generation Silicon, including the one on the iPad, you can run this display at full 5K 120 on those, including, like I said, the vanilla, just the regular M5. Now, if you're using any iPad generation, for example, like M4 before, well, you're simply pretty much going to be running on just the regular 4K or, 5K 60 or like 4K 60 or something like that. So I almost thought about refilming this part, but one of the things that changed in this display compared to when I got this to work was that there's a firmware update from version 26.3 to 26.4. So what this really means is that for PC compatibility, it's going to be temperamental. I'm not really going to try this anymore because it's just simply going to keep flickering. I'm not sure if there's an update on Windows 11 or not that is going to make this compatible, but I'm not going to try anymore. But nonetheless, PC usage, well, your mileage is going to vary also, especially if you have done the firmware upgrade on here. But I can tell you right now, before the firmware upgrade, I've done a video testing this. In fact, it was my first initial impression video, and I was able to get this to work without any problems. All right, the one last thing I want to go over is the MacBook Neo resolution. So when you plug that computer in, because it is a lower power and lower GPU computer, you're simply going to get 4K 60. And in order for you to pretty much get up to like 120 Hertz, you have to lower the resolution down to like about 180 or so. All right, now let's quickly compare this display to the Pro Display XDR, the 32-inch 6K one. Well, that display can only do 60 Hertz. And what happened is I thought Apple was going to do another 32-inch display with like 6K resolution, but to try to do in 6K with 120 Hertz, I mean, 5K 120 is already pushing the boundaries of like the graphics so much already that I know there are some computers out there that are having some like graphic glitches. Hopefully this new firmware update definitely help resolve those issues. But it is something very interesting to note because if you really think about this, yes, not all the pixels are refreshing at the same time, but nonetheless, when you're really running this at 120 hertz, if you're actually running all those pixels at any given time, for example, playing a video and so forth, you're really talking about like running two 5K displays side by side, right? Because if you're doing two 5Ks, 60 hertz, combine those, like it's 5K 120. So it's just kind of an analogy to really think about there, and trying to really do 6K at a much higher refresh rate. I think we need to wait for technology and the graphics performance and everything, and also these connectors to mature a little bit more. This bandwidth may be able to support it, but all the other components, for example, display engine and so forth, may not be able to handle that well at this point in time. And that's probably the reason why Apple have decided to go with a 27-inch 5K instead of a 32-inch 6K with a high refresh rate. The interesting part is that this one has, I already mentioned, 2,304 dimming zones. The other one only have 576, and I thought that display was really impressive already. This is even more impressive. Now, let's talk about some of the downside of this display. Yes, I will say that it does carry a price tag, but after everything that I've talked about, the entire package, the panel, the fact that you can do hardware calibration on this display, have all these preset reference mode, the vertical integration into macOS, the Pro Display Calibrator that's built into macOS, amazing speakers, camera, microphone, and so forth. Considering the price for the package, and also the fact that this has good color accuracy and can also show, for instance, 98%, 97, 98% Adobe RGB, the price for a mini LED, I think this is about reasonable. I don't think this is overpriced for a mini LED. And there's nothing out there right now that is 27-inch 5K with mini LED backlight with this many zones. And many other companies that are making mini LED backlight, they tend to make cheaper versions with way less zones, and there are a lot of compromises to that. So this tends to be like the least amount of compromise on the system. Nonetheless, there is some. For example, one of the things that you're going to see, because this is still mini LED and it does zoning, is that you'll still see blooming. Now, in a day-to-day use, are you really going to notice that much? Or are you going to really view something that's just pretty much black on white? For example, a black web page with just a graphic white logo in the middle. Most of the time, most of us are not really going to do that. And even though we may be editing a dark image or a dark footage, there's generally going to be some light there. There's never going to be zero. So it's not going to be that much of a problem. But if you want to find the best place to really see the blooming happening, is pretty much just run a restart on the Mac. Link this display up to the Mac, run a restart, you will see the Apple logo showing up, see blooming around the Apple logo. It's really minimized, it's really not that bad at all, but nonetheless, you can still see that. So this is a side effect of mini LED backlight, so that's something to note about there. I wouldn't say this is a big deal or anything at all. And overall, I would say that this is a minimal compromise. There is no KVM switch. You just saw me a moment ago. I'm literally a human KVM, so swapping the cables around. And when we compare this to, for instance, other 5K display are out there, I would say that, you know, Apple is really giving all the other display companies right now really a run for the money. With full calibration preset, fine-tuned calibration, it has the full vertical integration, the design package speaker. I already talked about all these. These are really amazing stuff that other display manufacturer can't do that. You're relying on a third-party software from the display manufacturer to talk with the hardware a lot on the display due to the whole calibration process that requires you to dial in the setting. I mean, the way how Apple has simplified this, I think is just really amazing. And the one thing that I've also done the testing on this display is uniformity. Because this is mini LED backlight, I mean, I can tell you right now, it doesn't really matter whether I'm doing the percentage, whether I'm doing a Delta E AB or just a Delta E 2000. In the white, grays, and dark gray area, the Delta E values are always under 2. This uniformity on the display is just absolutely amazing, and it's something that you cannot get out of just a regular LED backlight display. That I would argue, even just a regular studio display, you're not going to get this good of a uniformity. So if you're looking for a good display with really amazing uniformity, this is also another one to consider. And one of the things too, talking about the display and the backlight technology, yes, even though this is using mini LED backlight, interesting enough, the backlight technology for those LED are still KFS phosphor because it responds to a lot of those tones. Again, something that you may not know, but I'm sharing that out anyway. All right. So one of the things that I wrote here was there was a comment on the video that I have released initially when I talk about this display, and it was just like, no, for photo, it's ASO only. For video, it's just Flanders Scientific or the Sony OLED mastering display. I mean, okay, that's great. If you're working at the very high end and that's the standard you want to go for, that's perfectly fine. But I'm also going to say that, you know what? The industry will move on. Time will move on. We now have a technology that's really great here, and this would be an amazing HDR mastering display or HDR just editing display for photos that you can really use. That there's no one out there that's really coming up with something that is really this innovative at this point in time. So yeah, I would simply say it's just time to embrace what is new. So This is a review of the Studio Display XDR. Obviously, if you can't tell, I'm really impressed with this display. I'm impressed with what Apple have done. I'm impressed with the integration, especially the full calibration method, and the fact that you can do a full hardware calibration on this display now. It's no longer just a pseudo hardware calibration, and you no longer have to get a device that starts at around $6,000 to run the full calibration on here. This is giving and putting all of the third-party displays manufacturers out there on notice. Do better, do more, give your customer more. And if you need to charge a little bit more for that, do it, but really push the boundaries and push the technology, because Apple is demonstrating something really great here. And if you're a photographer and you print, this is one of the best displays you can get out there right now. And I would even say this is probably going to rival BenQ SW display line. If you want to do HDR preview, it definitely will just knock a BenQ SW display line off the block, because on those displays, you can't do HDR preview. On any other display manufacturer for that matter, Asus, ViewSonic, they have 5K displays. But for instance, none of them has HDR, right? BenQ also have 5K display. None of them have HDR. It only goes to 4, 5, maybe 600 nits. We want something more, and we never got that. Now we have it. For instance, the SW display, the hardware calibration from BenQ, not in 5K. I've been telling the company for a very long time, you guys need to do that. Nobody decided to do it. Apple have come up with something like this. And like I said, if you're doing photography workflow, you want to do HDR preview, and it's just simply like turning on the lights on your photo, is something that's absolutely astonishing. That if you haven't seen that before, definitely play around with it, because I think it's really cool. And this display can show about 5-stop HDR in Adobe Lightroom Classic based on just my testing. So something interesting to note there. If you're also doing videos, for example, if you're just a content creator like myself and you want to do HDR, you want to be able to just edit HDR and just see everything you want to do. If you don't want to work on a small display like in your 14-16-inch Macro Pro, this would be a great display just to do that with. No, you don't need to get $1,000 or, $1,000. I mean, relatively speaking, you don't need to get the other brand displays. For example, the $40,000, $50,000 one, the Sony OLED mastering display. You can simply use something like this to do that work. Now, like I said, if you work in the high-end Hollywood setting and you have to be in a super control environment in those settings, well, maybe you need to get those displays. But otherwise, this is a really great display from Apple, and I think this is one of the pinnacle products that's out there. Anyway, I hope you find this helpful. Give this a like, subscribe, hit the bell if you're new. I'm Art, and I thank you for your time.